Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rousem Pereira. More than 380 local bodies spread across 13 districts went to polls in the second phase of the urban local bodies elections in Jammu and Kashmir today, amid a shutdown called by the separatists in the poll-bound areas. The elections, to be held in 4 phases, began on October 8th and will end on October 16th. The first phase on Monday saw a voter turnout of 8.3% in the Kashmir Valley, while more than 65% of the electorate voted in the Jammu and Ladakh divisions. 2 main regional parties, the National Conference and the People's Democratic Party, have boycotted the polls. Earlier, separatists asked people to observe a shutdown in the areas going to polls in the second phase in what they called sham elections. Joint resistance leadership comprising Syed Ali Shah Geelani, Mirwaiz Umar Farooq and Mohammad Yasin Malik in a statement said people will show their total disconnect and dismissal by staying away and boycotting this drama. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the local body polls and major issues that trouble Jammu and Kashmir. Joining me on the program today are BP Singh, former Home Secretary, Government of India and also former Governor; Rana Banerjee, former Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat; Anil Anand, senior journalist, as well joins us on the program today. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Singh, I'd like to begin the program with you. What do you make of the local body polls in Jammu and Kashmir?
Look, I must mention first that it was in 1992 that the Constitution of India was amended to provide for elections to the panchayats and the municipalities. And this became Part 9 and Part 9A of the Constitution of India. And this had a very important element, and that was to provide for 33% of reservation for the women. So this was considered to be a step forward because the founders of the Constitution, the members of the Constituent Assembly, wanted the powers to devolve below the state level. So it was a very revolutionary step, and elections took place, and there has been phenomenal change on account of this, particularly in respect of education, in respect of health care and other infrastructure facilities in the villages and the municipalities, although there has been complaints that the resources are less. Now, we wanted this also to take place in Jammu and Kashmir. And I was then the Union Home Secretary and I was trying to push it. But I found that the state leadership was not too keen. That was true of other states also. But it was much more so here because they succeeded, and the elections took place much later, and persistent efforts have not yielded positive results. Now, this present move to have elections of the panchayats and the municipal bodies, in fact, it has started with municipalities first in 4 phases and panchayats later in 9 phases. I personally feel that this is a very, very positive step towards deepening of democracy in Jammu and Kashmir, because this will ensure involvement of the people. And I am not surprised at the boycott of these elections by a section of people, particularly in Kashmir Valley, because the 3 major parts, the PDP, the National Conference and the Hurriyat, although Hurriyats have never participated in elections, are against it. But it only shows a mentality, it only shows a state of mind, because it is democracy what they want really, but it is democracy what on the ground they oppose. What does democracy mean? If democracy does not mean the upliftment of the last man, giving powers to the last man,
right,
dividing the distinction between we and they, that is democracy. They becomes we, and that is what democracy and democratic elections provide for. So it makes me feel sad that half of the population, that is less voting, and the other half of the population there is high voting. So on the whole, I think it will work out to be 35, 36, 40%. But let us see how it happens in Panchayat.
Indeed. Let us see. Of course, what happens in the near future is what Mr. Singh is suggesting. Mr. Banerjee, you know, despite the boycott calls by the separatists, people have come out and voted in Jammu and Kashmir. There has been tepid response as far as the boycott call is concerned. Of course, certain pockets, the voter turnout has not been very high, but on the whole, it seems like people have come out and want democracy to prevail.
Well, it's a mixed view, I would think. In the present context of the disturbed situation in many parts of the state, the need for such local body polls was validly considered to be a way out, to reach out in a manner where the vacuum in local political contact between the people, even the alienated sections of the population and politicians, had become almost complete. So it's an effort by the state administration to reverse that position. And it's also a test for the state in terms of their law and order capacity, whether they can actually hold such elections in, albeit in security, tight security conditions, but this could be a precursor to a wider exercise next month when the Panchayat elections are also to be held. So if this is successfully held, as Mr. Singh has rightly pointed out, it would be a shot in the arm for the state administration.
And it's a good precursor for things to come is what you're suggesting.
Yes, but one will have to take it with a mixed view, because in the most disturbed areas, the turnout has been abysmal. You know, Anantnag or Badgam, Baramulla, not even 3% turnout of voters is there. So the element of fear still pervades over the common people. They may be wanting to have such a representation of their own people at the lowest rung of administration to enable, you know, better implementation of the felt developmental needs through the administration's programs. But fear still pervades, and this is a phenomena which will, you know, in the days and months to come again unfold, because the security cover cannot be, you know, indefinite and complete. So once the security is withdrawn or a little bit lowered, then even those elected in areas where there are not so much trouble, they will be facing, you know, violence from certain elements who are still having the capacity to hit at them.
Right. We've seen that as far as the policemen of Jammu and Kashmir are concerned. You know, that's a new ploy that the terrorists have used.
They face a very difficult situation. They and their families in the villages.
Sure.
Indeed.
Anil Anand, let me bring you into the picture now. You know, two main regional parties, of course, the People's Democratic Party and the National Conference have stayed away from this particular election. Why is that so?
According to me, there are two reasons. One reason, of course, the ground realities and the controversies over 35A and 370, Article 370 of the Constitution of India. So they just just made it a ploy to wriggle out of the elections. One was that. So they thought it will give them a handle for a bigger election. Maybe the assembly elections are also coming. Maybe the Lok Sabha elections are there. So they could better do to consolidate their position for those bigger stakes. Two, as Mr. BP Singh said, there were always opposition. When he was Home Secretary, he very rightly said it right. Opposition from the political parties as well as the legislators, more so from the MLAs, not to have Panchayat elections. In other parts of the country also, and more so in Jammu and Kashmir, I know it personally. The reason was the MLAs were not liking the idea of sharing power with Panchayat, Sarpanchs and Panchayats. One, it was devolution of power to the ground level. Two, decision making would have gone to the Panchayats. Three, you would have shared the development funds with them. So this idea somehow was not clicking with the MLAs. So they put pressure on their leadership. Be it the National Conference or be it the PDP, even in Congress circles also at that point of time. So they played their pressure tactics, the MLAs, the legislators or the other low middle rung leaders, and these parties bowed to their wishes. So one reason was that the pressure is still on them, because they are viewing future parliament and assembly elections rather than focusing on Panchayat elections.
Right. You know, Mr. Singh, as a former governor yourself, I have to ask you this question.
Yes.
You know, do things become simpler with governor's rule in place, really, or does it become far more complicated? And how does it affect a state like Jammu and Kashmir?
I must tell you that a state prospers, marches forward when there is harmony between democracy, culture, and governance. The situation in Jammu and Kashmir is a bit complicated. If you look at the population profile, Kashmir Valley has roughly about 51% of the state's population. But territory-wise, it is less. It is the smallest. Population-wise, Ladakh is the lowest. And territory-wise, it is the largest. Jammu comes in the middle. Now, one thing is clear from here, that 49% of the people are very keen. They are fully participating. The problem is with the 51, because the major political parties, they have decided to boycott it. Now, when there is a precedence rule, the question that you asked, it is easy to decide. Administratively, it is easy to enforce, comparatively. But what is important is democracy means something bigger. Democracy has to express the views of the people, how they perceive their welfare. Now I tell you, Jammu and Kashmir is a state where everybody says, I mean, irrespective of political parties, that they are one of the most bright group of people in the country. Valley, Ladakh, Jammu, and yet the percentage of literacy is one of the lowest. Now, through these elections, a governor has to see how to change the face. These are the two tools, education and democratic empowerment. So I think I entirely endorse the decision of the Government of India and also of the governor to go for these elections, because this is the answer. One of the answers of Jammu and Kashmir is democracy and more democracy.
Right. Mr. Banerjee, that having been said, how important are these polls, do you think? I mean, the most important thing, looking at the problems in Kashmir right now, is this one step towards a better Kashmir?
Oh, well, most certainly it is politically very important. As I said, to enable the rate of governance to slowly start getting established and reach out into the interior areas, it's a test case. And definitely, once some form of representation politically is available on the ground, it provides a medium to try and deliver better governance, and through the governor's or the president's rule, there will be less of political interference in the implementation of development programs. So that could help in ameliorating the felt needs of the people in the rural areas, and this could perhaps address the issue of alienation also, which is of course more a political and a mental idea of the people in the valley particularly. So that will need a sort of, it will be a long and arduous process. It won't happen overnight, but it would be an incremental step forward.
Anand, what is the political message that comes out of this really?
Look, there is no alternative to elections in a democratic polity. Whenever, at whatever level you hold elections, these are a welcome sign. These show that the times are normal, people participate, whatever be the percentages. My feeling is the message is that the democracy is still alive and bubbling in Jammu and Kashmir despite all the problems. This is despite the fact that one negative point of these elections which I see is that the regional divide is very visible in the percentage of votings, which I wouldn't have liked as a journalist and as a local of that state also. I wouldn't have liked. My feeling is maybe a little more effort should have gone or could have gone in organizing the election, before ensuring that some kind of an honorable percentage takes place, voting percentage takes place in Kashmir Valley. Jammu region is no problem. Ladakh region is no problem. The basic area, the issue is Kashmir. So still I hold that any election anywhere, particularly at the grassroots level, devolution of power to the panchayat level, this is very, very important. But there are problem areas, there are challenges now. The government will have to see how 30 to 40,000 elected panchayat members are protected. As you rightly said in the beginning, the J&K police personnel are being targeted. Their families are soft targets. And in the past also, when the elected governments refused to hold election, one ploy, one alibi which they took was that we can't provide security to each and every one of 30 or 40,000 elected panchayat members. How government would deal with it, how the confidence will be instilled in them so that they could freely work, this will have to be seen.
I think that's a very valid point that
Yes,
is raised,
yes.
by Mr. Anil Anand.
Yes.
Mr. Singh, elections or holding the elections successfully is one aspect of it. How do you ensure that, calm prevails after the elections and people are protected? That's another aspect, isn't it? And how do we ensure that?
I have served in undivided Assam. When elections were first held in the state now called Nagaland, it was less than 2%. Today, the highest number of voters are from that state. The turnout is there. Democracy has its own ways of strengthening itself. And here, what is important is that it also creates leadership, men and women, the panchayats, the municipalities. So, if men are created, women are come up to have a stake in democracy, this is the way forward. And institutions are important. If you shut down a panchayat, you are shutting down a very important institution. It is unfortunate that the locks have been on those doors for quite long. We have to open that. We have to send men and women who are capable of running their own affairs. That is what is important. And therefore, I personally feel that when it comes to security question, it's a question of how effective the state system is in cornering, in controlling these separatists, armed separatists in particular. And that is a challenge. And that challenge is there even now. That challenge may be more tomorrow, maybe more day after tomorrow. So we have to handle that.
Mr. Banerjee, since it's your domain, I have to ask you this question. Is a strong message now going to be sent out to the separatists through these local body polls that are being held? And are they going to come out more strongly in the near future?
Well, if you take history as a guide, the separatists are not going to be unduly ruffled either by the success of holding local body elections or the incapability of the state to be able to hold it effectively, but they would look for sporadic actions, and that is where the state law and order machinery effectiveness, as Mr. Singh has pointed out, would be tested. And we have another problem, the separatist capacities would be related to the extent of instigation and support that they can get from across the border, so in material terms as well. So that would also determine how much they can do and at what level. There would be certainly attempts to have more incidents of arson, to do some selective killings of more prominent local politicians, just to put or instill more fear among their compatriots and other peers coming forward to take on this role. But this will depend on whether and the extent to which the support from across the border is calibrated. At this particular moment in time, I would assess that the calibration would not be raised too much, because there is the expectation or the feeling in the military establishment on the other side that they do not want to escalate the situation, and they do want to set up some sort of a communication and a situation of negotiated talks, etc., between the new government there and the government here. So they may not unnecessarily or needlessly ratchet it up, but they would at the same time not stop completely.
Yeah, but we could witness a period of lull is what you're suggesting.
A lull with sporadic incidents, selective incidents to take out some of the more important leaders who have decided to not adhere to the boycott.
Right.
And in this situation, I think it would have made a very good, move if there had been some more different statements on the acceptability or the permanence of Section 35A and the permanence of Article 370. If the affidavit of the central government in the courts had been more positive, or that would have perhaps persuaded the regional parties not to go for this boycott. So that could be, that sort of message could even be given after the elections are held successfully.
Right. Anil Anand, Rana Banerjee has spoken about the fear factor really as far as the valley is concerned, and probably that's why the voter turnout has been low as well in several of these places like Srinagar and Baramulla and others. But, is it just the fear factor that is keeping the electorate away, or is it something else as well?
Look, fear factor has always been there, right from the 1990s through to 2018. But phases have come where very popular elections were held. 2002 assembly election, for instance, subsequent Lok Sabha elections, 60%, 70% voting. Why has it happened that from that, now we had a by-election in which Dr. Farooq won by 6% votes only took place. And now 3%, as Banerjee sir said, in somewhere 3%, 2%. This factor we must comprehend, we must keep in mind why it happens. The fear factor was then also, the now also. Some confidence building measures need to be taken from time to time. He raised a very valid point, Mr. Banerjee, that the central government's affidavit before the Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court on 35A, it is a very good affidavit from one perspective, though their core constituency may not be agreeing with it, but they should have encashed it with the Kashmiri leadership. I think more dialogue, more talks should have been taken, and they should have sold this affidavit so that they are encouraged and they come out. I think there are certain gaps seem to be there. Otherwise, every Kashmiri leader welcomed that affidavit when it was filed in the Supreme Court. So what went wrong after that? So my feeling is that affidavit could have become a foundation for encouraging the Kashmiri leaders, National Conference and PDP to come out and participate in voting.
Right. Mr. Singh, your thoughts on 35A and 370 really?
I have already discussed this with you earlier in the program, and I have not changed my mind. What I am seeing that two political developments which are in store and in a short time span. One is the question of whether the governor will make an effort to form a new state government political leadership on the basis of the present assembly, because it has tenure. And the second, which is important, is the Lok Sabha elections. And these are all very close. And this will have a bearing on law and order, which we discussed a little while ago. This will have a bearing on political mismatch or good match, whatever you call it, among political leaders and political parties. The governor can even take a decision to recommend that assembly elections and Lok Sabha elections may be held together. What will be its impact? All these are there which will try to come on the table. And I think that would be a better time, in my view, to talk about Article 370 and Article 35A. This is my perception. If I had to do the policy formulation, I would have gone on that, because you have two more elections coming.
Right. Mr. Banerjee, the best way forward really as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, considering that we have some, crucial elections coming up?
Well, in my thinking or way, the best way forward would be to have a more pronounced or different outreach, political outreach in the valley, not connected to holding of elections. And that has to be done by national leaders as well as regional leaders to reach out to the alienated elements and to tell them that, well, we understand what you mean by Azadi. We know that it is not directly related to secession, and we will try to make sense of it and also fulfill some of the aspects of the sentiment that you have in this regard. Now, this has to be a political outreach by politicians of stature. And so far, I don't see any sign of any efforts in this direction.
All right. Anil Anand, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I agree with Mr. Banerjee's reading of what has happened and what hasn't happened. See, we need to have a different kind of a political approach, which should be all encompassing. You have to go one step forward, two steps backward. That is okay. You have to justify, political parties have to justify their constituencies. But dialogue is the only process. You have to talk to different people at different times. Only problem is when, where, why. These questions can be addressed. But a better atmosphere should be created before next elections are held, be it the assembly or the Lok Sabha, or if the elections are together held, so that this low percentage is not reflected in Kashmir Valley.
Mr. Singh, I'll let you have the last word on the program.
I see that the municipal and the panchayat elections are in the direction of a step forward towards democracy, the emergence of a new democratic era. And once we have this made functional, we should go for elections to the assembly and to the Lok Sabha, and then there should be dialogue, as has been rightly emphasized, with all stakeholders, and this is the only way.
All right. With that, then, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective. For us, what's coming out of this debate is the fact that we cannot shy away from dialogue. Dialogue is the only way, really, to deal with the problem of Jammu and Kashmir, and only by talking can we resolve the problems that are facing the state. That's it from me. See you again next time.